Hey guys, welcome to Soothing Bedtime, short cozy corner for gentle bedtime stories that help you drift off while learning something new. Tonight, we're heading somewhere freezing cold, colder than your ex's heart. Colder than that one time you tried to walk barefoot to the mailbox in winter. We're traveling back over 1,000 years, deep into the frostbitten landscapes of Scandinavia, to see how the Vikings, yes, those axe-swinging, fur-clad legends managed to survive winters that could make a polar bear shiver. And, spoiler alert, they did it without space heaters, Amazon wool socks, or even Netflix to distract them. You probably won't survive this. I mean, seriously, imagine endless weeks with no sunlight, wind howling through wooden walls, and a diet that's basically fermented fish and mystery stew. You wake up in the dark. You go to sleep in the dark. Your boots are frozen. Your breath fogs in front of your face inside your home. And your only real insulation, a wool tunic, some reindeer pelts, and a whole lot of stubbornness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your part of the world now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing outside in the pitch black morning chill. The sun not even thinking about showing up yet. In winter, daylight in Viking homelands might last just 4 or 5 hours. So you, a Norse farmer, or maybe a shipbuilder, begin your day guided by starlight and habit. The cold bites hard-like, actually hurts your face, kind of cold. Your breath hangs in the air in ghostly clouds. Snow crunches beneath your leather boots, which, by the way, are only slightly less terrible than going barefoot. But you're used to this. Everyone here is. You don't complain. For people in warmer countries, Scandinavia, what we now call Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, was wild back then. Dense forests, towering mountains, icy fjords. Picture Alaska with less tech and more mead. Winters were long, brutal, and often unpredictable. A blizzard could roll in and trap your whole village under snow for days. Temperatures might dip below, freezing for weeks at a time. And there were no detailed forecasts, just stormy skies and your grandmother's aching knees. But even in that frozen silence, life went on. You knew how to read the sky, how to follow animal tracks in the snow, and which trees were driest for firewood. You understood how to survive, because survival was baked into every single thing you did. Now, historians still argue whether the climate back then was truly harsher than today's Arctic extremes, or if it's just that we modern folks are softer. Either way, one thing's clear. The Vikings were built different. And they had to be. Because even with all their legendary toughness, winter was still their biggest enemy. Not rival clans, not invading Saxons, just the cold. The morning routine starts slow. Your longhouse creaks like an old ship, timbers snapping as they adjust to the freezing air. Smoke rises lazily from the hole in the roof your home's only real chimney. Inside, it's still dim. Someone stokes the hearth fire, careful not to waste any wood. That fire's been burning all night, tended in shifts. Because letting it go out means a very cold, very grumpy household. You sip something hot. Maybe it's a weak beer or a barley-based broth. Water freezes too easily, so everyone drinks low alcohol, ale safer, and a little warming. Breakfast, probably cold porridge if you're lucky. Maybe some dried fish, tough as leather, but packed with calories. You chew slowly, mostly just to warm your jaw up. The floor is packed earth, still icy. Your breath puffs even indoors. But there's a calmness to the place, a rhythm. You hear quiet voices, the shuffling of feet, the snore of someone who refuses to wake up before the sun hay, even in 870 AD. There's always that one person. By now, your outer clothes are layered on. Thick wool tunics, a leather belt, maybe a fur cloak if you're high status or your cousin traded well this year. Your hands are wrapped in wool scraps, not quite gloves, just enough to keep your fingers moving. There's no such thing as waterproof gear, but you've learned where snow sneaks in and how to block it out. Outside, the world is hushed. Snow softens sound. So, even the forest feels like it's holding its breath. You pass the storage shed, where salted meat hangs in icy stillness, past the livestock pen, where the animals huddle for warm steam rising from their woolly backs. You nod at a neighbor, their face barely visible beneath layers of fur. No one talks much in this kind of cold. Words freeze on your lips anyway. You spot the ocean in the distance, its edge iced over. Some of your kin are boat builders, but they still check the hulls, make sure no rot sets in. A good longship is too valuable to risk, even under layers of snow. Mid-morning, if you can call it that, light finally spills across the treetops. A soft orange glow, low on the horizon, almost embarrassed to show up. It's not much, but it helps. You bask in it for a moment, grateful, and just as quickly, it starts to fade. You make your way back inside as the wind picks up. It whistles through cracks in the longhouse walls. But the fire's alive, crackling now. You hold your hands over it, wiggling fingers stiff from the cold. Someone's added a chunk of peat to the fire. Smells earthy, slightly sour. Not pleasant, but it burns long and hot. You curl up near the fire pit, wrapping a fur across your lap. Your breath slows. Outside, the snow thickens. And inside, you're reminded that this frozen world, while dangerous, is also oddly beautiful. Now, here's a fun little tidbit. Some Viking children reportedly played a game where they'd run barefoot through snow to prove their toughness. Yeah, barefoot. Makes you rethink complaining about cold floors, doesn't it? Even stranger, there's evidence that some Viking Age folk believed extreme cold was sent by frost giants, mythical beings from Jotunheim. So next time you're cursing your frozen windshield, just know you're in a legendary battle to dot, asterisk, and even today. Archaeologists still debate just how isolated Viking settlements were in winter. Some argue trade and communication mostly stopped. Others believe they still traveled, hunted, and even raided because snow didn't scare a Viking. Not when survival was just part of the daily routine. And that's just the first breath of winter, my friend. Just wait until we get to their wool game, their hot rock tricks, and their wait for it no baiting policy. You pull your cloak tighter as the wind slices sideways across the snow-packed ground. Your toes are tingling in that unpleasant, almost frozen kind of way, and it's only mid-morning. Welcome to life in Viking winter wear. Dressing yourself is less about fashion and more about survival. And no offense, but that hoodie you're wearing now wouldn't last 2 seconds out here. The real MVPs of the Viking wardrobe. Wool and layers. Lots and lots of layers. You start your dressing routine close to the skin. A linen shirt, if you're lucky enough to own one, that's the base layer. Linen breathes well, absorbs sweat, and doesn't itch like wool. But linen isn't easy to come by in the north, especially in winter. So maybe you skip straight to your scratchy friend, wool. Spun from the sheep you probably helped shear last spring. Woven into thick tunics and trousers by someone in your household. Most likely your mother, sister, or wife. Spinning and weaving. Huge part of Viking life. Not just chores, but actual lifelines in the cold now. The wool isn't soft and cozy like your grandma's blanket. This stuff is rough, coarse, and heavier than you'd expect. But that's the point. It's not meant to pamper. It's meant to trap heat. It's woven in a way that keeps warmth in and wind out. Wet. No problem. Wool stays warm even when it's soaked. Science still can't beat that one. The Vikings figured it out over 1,000 years ago. You throw on a second tunic, because of course you do. Layering isn't a modern trick. The Norse were doing it before it was cool. Literally, you cinch everything with a belt, both to keep the heat in and to carry small tools or a knife. Nothing says, "I'm freezing," but still functional, like an axe hanging off your belt. Next, trousers made from more wool or sometimes animal skins. Maybe foot wrappings thing, strips of cloth wound around the feet and lower legs. No elastic socks here. These wrappings could be changed out often, which helped prevent frostbite, trench foot, and whatever ancient horrors your damp boots were. Shoes were usually leather, often reindeer or cattle hide, sometimes stuffed with straw or moss for insulation. That's right, moss. You're walking around with nature's version of foot warmers, and it works surprisingly well. The fringe fact of the day: archaeologists have found actual Viking mittens that look suspiciously like oversized oven mitts. No fancy finger cutouts, just big wool lumps for hands. They're clumsy, sure, but they keep your fingers from turning into icicles while you're out feeding sheep or scraping ice off a longship. And let's talk headgear. Vikings knew that heat escapes fast through the head. So you've got a woolen cap, sometimes called a cuffer. Not cute, very warm. Picture a floppy cone-shaped hat that kind of makes you look like a sleepy garden gnome. You also have a scarf or neck wrap made of wool tied around your throat to keep wind from creeping down your collar. And then the piece de resistance, your outer cloak, made from heavy wool or even fur bear, wolf, fox, if you're staticky enough. This isn't a tailored coat. It's basically a big, wearable blanket, fastened with a brooch at one shoulder. Ever tried doing chores with a giant piece of fabric flapping around you? Yeah, it's not ideal, but it's warm, and that's what matters. You don't mind a little flapping when it means your body doesn't seize up like a frozen chicken nugget. Now, remember that joke about fashion? Here's the twist. Vikings did care about appearance. They dyed their clothes using natural pigments plant roots, like an iron oxide. So your winter outfit might include bright red trousers or a blue tunic if your family had the resources. There's even evidence they bleached linen to get it white, despite the effort that took. A clean, bright shirt under your layers. Major flex in the fjords. Historians still argue whether these colors were common among average folk or reserved for the elite. Some suggest vibrant dyes were mainly for ceremonial wear. Others think even farmers added little splashes of color to break the monotony of the gray, snowy months. Whatever the case, the Norse weren't wandering around looking like dirty cavemen. They had style, practical, rugged, sheep-scented style. But even the best outfit only went so far. Wind still found its way through seams. Snow melted down your back. Wet wool got heavier than guilt after a Viking raid. And so you learned to keep moving, standing still. That's when the cold gets you. So you chop wood. You fix that drafty part of the longhouse wall for the 15th time this week. You glance down at your boots, again cracked at the toe. The laces tied with a bit of gut string. The straws holding up for now. You wiggle your toes. Still. There. Good. Now here's something quirky. Some Norse folks believed that certain animals had magical properties when worn. Fox fur might bring cunning. Bear skin gave you strength. And sealskin. That was like the North Sea's version of a thermal blanket. If you were lucky enough to trade for some, you wore it with pride and warmth. And while we're here, yes, some Viking warriors did fight shirtless or with minimal gear in winter. The famous berserkers, supposedly so full of rage or spirit possession that they didn't feel the cold. Or so the sagas say. Historians still argue whether this was literal truth or poetic license. Were they madmen charging in loincloths, or just wearing light armor because it let them move faster? Either way, you're not a berserker. You're a sensible Viking with a fear of frostbite and a deep love for that scratchy wool tunic your aunt made. So you keep it all on, from mossy boots to fur-trimmed cloak, and you thank the gods for sheep, because without wool, you wouldn't last a week out here. You stamp the snow off your boots and step inside the longhouse, blinking as your eyes adjust to the dim flickering of firelight. Instantly, you feel the change. It's not warm, exactly at least, not by modern standards, but there's a thick, smoky heat hugging the center of the room. You head straight for it, drawn like a moth dot. This, right here, is the heart of Viking winter survival. The hearth, not the fireplace your grandparents cozy up beside. No mantle, no bricks, no Christmas stockings. Just a large, open pit dug into the floor, lined with stones, and always burning. A few charred logs crackle softly, their glow lighting the smoke-stained beams above. You hold your hands out and sigh. Fingers tingle back to life. The hearth does everything. It cooks your food, warms your bones, lights your home, dries your clothes, and gives your entire family a reason to huddle close together, whether you like them or not. And in the dark months of deep winter, when the snow stacks high outside, and the wolves howl in the trees, it becomes your only true defense against the chill. The longhouse itself isn't built for comfort. Not really. It's practical. You're standing in a narrow rectangle of rough timber and packed dirt. Thick wooden walls, chinked with moss and mud. No insulation like we know it, but the design is clever. Low ceilings trap rising heat. Few windows, if any, keep the cold out and the warmth in. One narrow door, probably on the gable end, always creaking, and smoke. Oh, there's smoke. It wafts up toward a hole in the roof, but doesn't rush to leave. You're breathing it all day, and you'll smell like it forever. Surprisingly, that's kind of the idea. The smoky air serves a secret second job. It helps preserve everything. Meat hanging overhead, drying skins, wooden tools, even the wood of the longhouse itself benefits from the smoke, becoming more resistant to bugs and rot. And weirdly, the constant low-level coughing is just part of life. You're not alone either. A whole extended family, maybe 20 people, live in this one long space. Parents, siblings, children, elders, and often animals too. Cows, goats, maybe chickens, clucking in a corner pen. Their body heat adds to the warmth. It's a shared ecosystem of survival. Sure, it smells like a barnyard wearing a wool sweater, but it works. In this center hearth, it never stops. You take turns feeding it, poking it, guarding it. Letting the fire go out in midwinter is a serious mistake. You'd lose hours restarting if you even can. Fire making without modern tools is not quick. So you keep a small flame, or at least smoldering coals, alive constantly. In emergencies, some communities would actually walk embers to each other in a hollowed horn or covered pot, like ancient Uber Eats, but for fire. Historians still argue whether Viking homes had chimneys at all, or just relied on smoke holes in the roof. Some excavations suggest a clever venting system, while others show evidence of soot blackening the walls for generations. Either way, if you're inside a Viking home in winter, you're breathing like you live inside a giant candle. There's a rhythm to life around the hearth. People sit in circles, sharing warmth and stories. Children listen wide-eyed as elders recount tales of Thor's hammer or sea serpents big enough to crush ships. Meals simmer in heavy iron pots, suspended above the flame's simple stews of barley. Turnips or salted meat, slow cooked all day. Bread bakes on hot stones. Fish smokes on racks, and that smell, a heady mix of burning peat, old fur, and dinner. Here's a strange but true fact. Some Viking homes placed their dead near the hearth for a while before burial. Why? Maybe out of respect. Maybe to keep the body from freezing solid before proper rituals. Maybe because warmth was seen as a bridge between life and the afterlife. Either way, kind of puts your uncomfortable couch naps in perspective. And while we're being real, the hearth isn't romantic. It's messy, unpredictable, and occasionally dangerous. Sparks fly. Children get too close. Food spills. The wind howls down from the roof, opening and blows ash in your stew. But it's better than the alternative. You think about how much this one pit of flame controls your whole life. If it's too weak, everyone's cold. If it flares up too strong, the smoke chokes you out. If a log shifts wrong, your cloak catches fire. There's a balance here, delicate and ancient. And you're part of it, whether you're warming your hands, cooking seal blubber, or just watching the shadows dance on the timbered walls. And guess what? People even socialized differently around the fire. Seating was strategic. The oldest or most honored sat closest. Children and lower status folks got the outer circle. Your spot told others everything they needed to know about your standing. Kind of like the ancient Norse version of cafeteria politics. Now, fun tidbit. Some sagas mention fires being used to test truth. A lying tongue, they believed, couldn't withstand the heat. If you burned your hand while swearing innocence, yikes. Justice was as warm as it was terrifying. And on a more everyday note, your clothing, true clothing, dries here. Your tools thaw here. And sometimes babies are born here. The hearth isn't just heat. It's the pulse of Viking winter life. When darkness falls by 3 p.m., this time of year, you gather close once again. The wind rattles the wooden walls. The snow taps softly against the roof. But here, inside this smoky, glowing chamber, there's life, conversation, laughter, the clink of wooden bowls, the slow bubbling of stew. Someone sings low and off-key. In the background, a lullaby passed down through too many winters to count. You huddle closer. You tug your cloak tighter. And you understand this flame in the pit isn't just fire. It's the only reason you're still breathing. You wake up to the smell of wood smoke and something faintly gamey. Probably the stew that's still hanging over the hearth from last night. Your body is stiff from sleeping on straw stuffed under a hide, your nose half frozen, and your fingers curled like you've been clenching a sword in your dreams. But despite the chill in the air, there's one part of you that feels oddly cozy. Your face. More specifically, your beard. Or, if you're not beard capable, the thick braids wrapped tightly around your head. Because, in the Viking world, hair isn't just for stylist's insulation. You stretch and sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes with calloused hands. The fire's been kept going through the night, though it's mostly glowing embers now. Around you, others begin to stir under piles of fur and wool. You're not sure who snores louder, your cousin or the goat in the corner. You shuffle over to the fire, fingers reaching for the warmth. And as you do, you notice something else. Your breath fogs up again, but your cheeks don't sting. Your beard scratchy, tangled, and full of mysterious crumbs doing its job. It's keeping you warm. Here's the thing. Vikings weren't just rocking beards for intimidation points. Facial hair, for those who could grow it, served a functional purpose. In sub-zero weather, it formed a kind of thermal barrier, trapping heat around your jawline and acting as nature's scarf. The longer the beard, the more heat retained. Sure, ice might build up on the outside, but underneath, toasty. And it wasn't just about beards. Vikings paid a lot of attention to hairhead, face, even body. Not because they were vain though, honestly, some of them probably were, but because it helped regulate temperature. Long hair was often braided or tied up to avoid catching fire in the hearth or getting tangled in tools. Braids also compacted hair, helping retain body heat better than loose hair would, especially under hats or cloaks. There's even a quirky little tidbit for you. Some Viking women and men used lard or animal fat as a kind of hair pomade. It helped hold braids in place and created a bit of a barrier against wind and snow. You smelled like a walking sausage, sure, but how your scalp stayed warm. Historians still argue whether the Vikings regularly covered their hair in winter, or just left it to the mercy of the elements. Some graves show head coverings and scarves. Others suggest that well-maintained braids were enough. There's also debate about how widespread grooming rituals were among the average folk versus the wealthy or warrior class. But what's clear, the Norse didn't see cleanliness and warmth as mutually exclusive. They just had their own version of shower and style. As you sip a weak beer because water's frozen solid outside, you look around the longhouse. Someone's brushing their hair with a carved bone comb. That's right, combs. These people made them, used them, and sometimes even carried them like personal totems. Archaeologists have found them in graves, tucked lovingly beside swords or brooches. Combs were part of Viking daily life, and not just for vanity. Keeping your hair neat reduced lice, trapped less moisture, and made your wool hat fit better. Speaking of hats, you tug your wool cap over your ears and head outside. The cold hits fast, but your face is covered. The beard protects the lower half. The cap covers the top, and the wind finds no easy gaps. You head out to the woodshed to grab kindling. As you work, your body generates heat, but it's your clothing. And, yes, your hair that helps trap it. You're basically a walking thermos. Which is important because the air's thick with frost. The kind of cold that makes your eyelashes freeze if you blink too slowly. Another fun fact: some Norse folks even applied oils or waxes to exposed skin to prevent windburn and frostbite. Seal oil was popular rubbed into the face, hands, or lips to protect against icy gusts. It wasn't exactly SPF 50, but it was the original winter moisturizer. You return to the longhouse just as someone starts combing a child's hair again. They're using fingers now, untangling knots gently but thoroughly. You hear the child giggle and squirm. It's a daily ritual, almost like a quiet ceremonial moment of care, warmth, and continuity. Hair isn't just insulation, it's memory, it's culture. And here's a strange but fascinating aside. In Norse mythology, hair has power. Loki, the trickster god, famously cut off the goddess Sif's golden hair, leading to a series of events that ended with magical gifts being forged, including Thor's hammer. Hair wasn't just practical, it was symbolic, tied to honor, status, and identity. You run your hand through your own unwashed but carefully braided hair. It's stiff with salt, probably a little smoke, and maybe a splash of last night's broth. But it's warm, and that's what matters later in the day. You'll help rewrap the livestock's blankets. Even animals got thermal treatment. You'll check your brother's boots for loose fur lining. Maybe swap out your own tunic for one that's a little thicker, a little less full of wood chips. But you won't shave. You won't cut your hair short, not until spring, because your beard is your scarf. Your braids are your crown. And in this ancient, frozen world, even your follicles are fighting to keep you alive. The wind rattles the longhouse again. A goat sneezes. You smile, stroking your frozen mustache. You're not just surviving the cold, you're styling through it. You're exhausted. And it's only early evening, though outside it's been dark for hours. The longhouse is thick with warmth and smoke now, and every breath feels like inhaling a campfire. Your shoulders ache from hauling firewood, and your nose is still pink from the cold air earlier. But now comes the best part of the day, bedtime. Except there's no bed. Not like the kind you're picturing, anyway. No mattress, no pillows, no warm duvet. In Viking winter, going to sleep is less about comfort and more about not waking up frozen solid. You shuffle to your sleeping area, or really, your sleeping patch. It's just a section of the longhouse floor, maybe slightly raised or lined with straw, and piled with animal skins. Everyone shares space, no personal space bubble. You're about to curl up with at least 4 family members, 2 dogs, and probably a goat that just refuses to sleep quietly. But honestly, it's warm, cozy even. Here's how it works. First, you lay out the bedding. If you're lucky, that includes layers of straw or moss underneath to insulate from the cold ground. On top, thick wool blankets, sheepskins, or furs. Cowhide is a favorite, but reindeer, bear, and fox are also common. You sink into the pile like a lumpy meatball in a furry casserole dish. Every layer is another barrier between you and the creeping cold. You wrap yourself in whatever cloaks or tunics you wore during the day. There's no such thing as changing into pajamas. The idea of stripping down before bed in a Scandinavian winter would have been laughable, like jumping into an ice bath and calling it relaxing. Instead, you sleep fully clothed, often with your boots still on. Or, if you're careful, you swap them for thick wool socks or foot wrappings that have been warming near the fire. You roll over, curl your body tight, and press your feet against someone else's to share heat. Yes, it's awkward. Yes, Uncle Olaf snores like a dying walrus, but you're warm. And that's all that matters. This communal sleeping arrangement isn't just about family togetherness. It's a survival tactic. Shared body heat keeps temperatures up, especially when the fire dies down overnight. Babies sleep between parents. Elderly folks get the warmest spots near the hearth. Animals, like dogs and goats, often sleep at the feet to radiate heat. It's the original multi-species sleepover. Now, historians still argue whether all Viking longhouses had these shared sleeping spaces, or if wealthier families had dividers, or even small raised platforms. Some archaeological finds suggest partitioned areas with wooden boards, especially in longer halls. Others believe everyone just bundled up together on the floor like a wool-clad burrito pile. Either way, the Viking bedtime motto, the more, the merrier and warmer. Here's a quirky little tradition for you before sleep. Some families performed a quiet blessing over the fire, muttering short prayers or invoking Thor or Frigg to guard the household. Not for sweet dreams. Those were optional, but to keep the cold and evil spirits out. The Norse believed winter nights were when spirits wandered freely, especially in the liminal hours between dusk and dawn. And don't even think about sneaking off for some midnight alone time. The longhouse is too packed. You so much as roll over and 3 people wake up. Privacy, not a winter luxury. Now, let's talk about the actual cold. Even inside, the temperature can drop significantly overnight. You feel it in your nose, your ears, your fingertips. Sometimes your breath hangs in the air above your face while you lie there, wrapped in 5 layers and your sister's borrowed cloak. But under the furs, with 4 humans and a sheep for company, it's survivable. Warmth isn't just from materials, it's from the people and animals you're crammed in with. Here's a weird tidbit. In some regions, people put heated stones or bricks under the bedding. A flat stone was left by the fire during dinner, then wrapped in cloth and slipped between the hides to radiate gentle heat through the night. The Viking version of a hot water bottle. If you've ever put your cold feet on a warm cat, you understand the principle. And yes, cats were often included in Viking homes, not just for catching mice, but for curling up at your side, purring like a tiny, furry furnace. You finally start to drift off. Someone hums a lullaby, low, wordless tune that's been passed down for generations. It's more vibration than melody, and it lulls you deeper. Outside, the snow falls silently. The wind is muffled by thick walls and snowbanks piled around the house, and inside, it's all soft breathing, occasional snores, and the low crackle of the last ember settling into ash. But even in this cozy half-sleep, part of you is alert. You have to be. The fire could need tending. An animal might stir. A storm could shake the door open. You are never truly off during winter. Rest is a series of short, warm stretches between responsibilities. And let's not forget the dreams. Viking beliefs saw dreams as messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from the dead, and sometimes just from too much herring. You might dream of fjords or fire or frost giants looming at the edge of your mind. In the morning, someone will ask what you saw in your sleep. You'll tell them, and they'll nod seriously. Dreams matter here. Eventually, your body relaxes fully. Your breath slows. The chill fades beneath furs and shared warmth. You stop thinking about your numb toes and start floating in that twilight space between reality and something older, deeper. The same kind of sleep your ancestors had 1,000 years ago, in this same kind of house, wrapped in the same kind of wool, beside a flickering fire that refuses to die. You're not just resting, you're surviving. You wake up with your face pressed into the shoulder of someone snoring, and your foot wedged under a dog that clearly had no intention of sharing. The fire's down to coals again, and the air inside the longhouse feels brittle with cold. You sit up, blinking, rubbing your arms. Morning's not here, yet tits just a dark pause between sleep cycles. But you're awake, so you may as well do something useful. You throw on your cloak and head for the water barrel, only to find, no surprise, it's frozen solid again. Getting drinking water in Viking winter isn't as simple as turning a tap. or even melting a handful of snow. Nope. Water takes work. This is where the ancient art of not dying of dehydration comes into play. You grab an axe, stomp your boots a few times, and step outside into the frigid dark. Time to harvest some ice. Back then, gathering water in the winter was a daily survival task. Streams might freeze at the edges or completely solidify. Wells, if your village was lucky enough to have one, could still require breaking through layers of ice each morning. Most often, you collected chunks of clean snow or ice from specific spots, places upstream, far from the animals, shaded enough to stay frozen but not buried too deep. You locate a patch of compact snow that's clean enough to melt, scoop some into a bucket, and head back inside, your breath puffing like a steam engine. Snow's not ideal. It takes a lot of it to get a little water, and it cools your body when you eat it raw, which is why you're going to heat it near the hearth, slowly, patiently, with the kind of zen calm only a frost-bitten Viking can muster. Once, inside, you drop the snow into a carved wooden pot and set it near the fire. Not on the fire would crack the pot, just close enough for the radiant heat to do its thing. The melting takes time, so you sip some lukewarm ale from last night. Instead, again, water wasn't always safe to drink, and in winter, fermentation actually helps preserve liquids. It also helps you not care that your socks are still damp. Now, here's something cool, pun intended. Viking families would sometimes insulate their water barrels or buckets using straw, moss, or even animal hair, wrapped tightly around containers, or packed between the bucket and a larger box. This insulation slowed freezing, especially indoors. Kind of like an ancient Yeti cooler, but with fewer corporate logos and more goat fur. Some households even had clever clay or stone vessels, with narrow necks and tight-sealing wooden lids to reduce evaporation and ice buildup. And in emergencies, you might toss a hot rock into a pot of snow just to speed things up. A trick that still works today. Just be careful not to drop in one that's too hot, unless you like explosive geysers in your kitchen. Historians still argue whether snow melting was the primary winter water method, or just a backup. Some suggest the Norse stockpiled water in sealed barrels during the autumn, storing them in root cellars to keep them from freezing too deeply. Others believe melting snow and ice was a daily norm in cold months, especially for small or mobile households. The truth probably varies by region, but one thing's certain: every drop of water in winter was hard-earned. Here's a quirky little detail. Some Norse folks flavored their water with herbs like yarrow or juniper nut for taste, though that helped but for health. These herbs were thought to strengthen the body against winter sickness and maybe keep spirits away, too. So imagine sipping a mug of barely thawed herbal water while wrapped in 6 pounds of wool, muttering something about trolls in the woods. Classic Viking Tuesday. But thirst wasn't your only problem. You needed water for cooking, cleaning, and yet bathing. But let's be real, bathing wasn't exactly a daily affair in midwinter. In fact, here's where things get a little fragrant. You see, personal hygiene was important to Vikings. Really, they had combs, tweezers, ear spoons, and yes, even washcloths. Saturday was often bathing day, called Lagerdaguj, literally means washing day, and is still Saturday in modern Scandinavian languages. But in winter, full-body bathing was rare. Instead, you'd wipe yourself down with a damp cloth warmed near the fire. Maybe scrub your face and hands and call it good. Soap was made from animal fat and ash functional, but not gentle. Oh yes, that was a thing. If you were lucky enough to live in a village with access to hot rocks and a small hut or cave structure, you might have taken part in a steam bath, throwing water on hot stones to create vapor, then sweating out the cold in a cramped, smoky chamber. It wasn't just about getting clean. It was spiritual, rejuvenating, hot rock therapy. Viking edition. Quirky tidbit of the day. There's archaeological evidence of heated stone baths in some Norse settlements, where people used steam and buckets rather than submersion. Kind of like if a sauna and a sponge bath had a baby. Of course, most folks didn't have that luxury, so you made do. You melted snow, boiled it for tea if you had herbs, washed what you could, and rationed the rest for stew and livestock. The idea of running water, a distant dream. Pipes, please. You were the plumbing. If someone wanted water, you went out and got it. So you settle into the firelight now. Your pot of snow finally melted. The water still a little cloudy but warm. You cup it in your hands and drink slowly. It tastes like smoke and cold fingers. And it's the best thing you've had all day. Survival in Viking winter isn't glamorous, but you start to understand something important. Everything is done with intention, with rhythm. Nothing is wasted, not even the snow. Every sip you drink is one more step toward spring. You're bundled tight, scarf around your face, fur-lined hood pulled low, and mittens clumsy but necessary. The sun, if you can call that pale streak, above. The tree's sun has barely lifted, but it's time to go out. Because the animals, they don't care if it's cold. They still need to eat. And keeping livestock alive through a Viking. Winter is not just a chorits, a delicate balance between survival and total disaster. You step into the biting wind, boots crunching over snow that's packed hard and gleaming like glass. Animal shelter, really more of a lean-to with reinforced walls. It's just a few yards away, but it feels like a mile. The goats bleat impatiently. A cow moos low and mournful, probably wondering why you didn't invent central heating yet. Back in the day, not every Norse household had animals, but many did. Goats, sheep, cows, pigs, chickens. They weren't just food sources. They were warmth, trade, and social status all rolled into one. And during winter, you didn't just own animals, you lived with them. Some longhouses had stalls, built directly into one end of the building, so humans and livestock shared a roof. Imagine sleeping with a cow 10 feet away not exactly glamorous, but it made sense. The animal's body heat added to the overall warmth of the space, and if the wind howled outside, at least the hay stayed dry. Historians still argue whether this cohabitation was common across all classes or more typical in rural or poorer households. Some say wealthier families kept livestock in separate barns. Others point to archaeological digs showing clear evidence of shared quarters even in larger homes. Either way, Vikings were deeply connected to their animals, part survival, part practicality, and yes, sometimes part emotional bond. You slide open the creaky gate of the shelter, and the heat hits you like a musky wall. It's not warm, exactly, but compared to the wind outside, it's paradise. The animals shuffle, snort, and eye you with what feels like judgment. You quickly get to work, spreading hay, checking for frostbite on ears and hooves, breaking the ice in the water trough. And speaking of water, remember your morning bucket filling adventure. Multiply that by 5 and carry it out here every single day, several times in the snow with numb hands. Oh, and the animals. They do not care about your struggles. They'll knock the bucket over in one kick, lick your coat out of curiosity, and stare blankly while you slip and land in what might not be just mud, but keeping them alive is crucial. Goats provide milk. Cows give both milk and potential meat. Chickens lay eggs. Pigs, well, pigs are less helpful in winter. They eat a lot, and if food runs low, let's just say pigs aren't exactly long-term planners. Your animals also provide manure, which may not sound exciting, but it's valuable. It helps insulate buildings, fertilize fields come spring, and even fuels fires if dried properly. Yeah, you heard right. Frozen animal droppings might be what's keeping your stew hot tonight. Welcome to Norse innovation. Now, here's a strange but true fact. In some regions, animals were believed to have spiritual connections. The family cow, for instance, might be whispered to for good fortune. Goats, especially black ones, were tied to fertility rituals. And even the Norse god Thor, who famously had two magic goats, Tangrisnir and Tangisnoster, who pulled his chariot and could be eaten and resurrected. Bit of a flex dot, and yes, your livestock had to eat too. Which means you had to plan well before winter started. Families spent weeks harvesting and drying hay, storing it in elevated sheds or haylofts to keep it dry and away from rodents. You remember those summer days now, sweaty and itchy, stacking bales while flies bit your ankles. That effort is paying off, sort of. The hay's dwindling already, and it's only midwinter. You ration it carefully, just enough to keep the animals fed and healthy. Not so much that you run out before the thaw. You toss an extra armful to the sheep, who are fluffier than usual, but still shivering. You can see your breath. They can't say thank you, but you. Imagine it anyway. A quirky tidbit. Some Vikings dressed their animals in makeshift coverings, blankets, or even scraps of hide to preserve warmth. There's mention in later sagas of prized horses wearing embroidered cloths in cold weather, like the ancient Norse version of horse pajamas. It wasn't fashion. It was survival. And sometimes, when the cold got too much or a blizzard threatened, you brought the animals into the human part of the longhouse. Not just near it, in it. You cleared space, moved a bench, and suddenly you were sharing your sleeping area with a bleeding goat. Was it chaotic? Sure, but it worked. Body heat plus a tightly sealed home meant no one human or animal froze. That night, as you shovel a path through the snow to the storage shed, you pass a row of carved wooden charms tied to a post-tiny animal figures, some cracked and weathered. Your grandmother made them years ago, small protections for the livestock. Superstition. Maybe, but you never let them fall. You make a final check before heading in. No signs of predators. Wolves and lynxes are rare, but not impossible. You've heard stories howls in the night, paw prints in fresh snow. You trust your dogs to alert you. Still, you keep a hand on your knife as you close the gate. Back inside the longhouse, the contrast is sharp. The air is smoky, crowded, and warm by comparison. You hang your cloak, pull off your wet mittens, and hold your hands toward the fire. Your fingers feel like stiff sausages, but they'll come back to life. Eventually, you can still smell the animals on new hay, sweat, and something worse, but no one comments. You all smell the same. That's winter. That's survival. And as you glance around the longhouse at the drying meat, the sleeping dog, the bundle of extra straw for tomorrow's bedding, you feel something strange. Not just tiredness or cold. Something like pride, because they're still alive. You are still alive. And in Viking winter, that counts as a win. You hear it before you see it, a low hum rising in pitch. The sound of the ice shifting across the fjord, groaning like the earth itself is tired of being frozen. You pause mid-step, one hand still on the doorframe. It's late afternoon, though the sky says otherwise, painted in that eerie blue that only winter dares to wear. It's time to hunt. Your family stores are holding, but barely. Dried fish, smoked meat, a few limp root vegetables curled up in the cellar like they're trying to survive the winter too. There's only so much porridge one person can eat before dreams of roasted meat start to haunt you. So you gather your gear, bow, arrows, a knife sharp enough to shave a beard, and a fur-lined cloak that smells faintly of old smoke and moss. The cold outside is sharp enough to make your eyes water, but you welcome it. Hunting is dangerous. It's also a chance to be alone with the trees and your thoughts, away from the noise of goats and cousins and the endless cough of the smoky hearth. Vikings were skilled hunters, and not just for sport. In winter, hunting wasn't an option, was a lifeline. You follow an ancient path, boots crunching on snow-crusted ground, ears tuned to the silence. The forest is hushed under a blanket of white, each tree a skeleton draped in frost. You scan for movement, deer, elk, hare, even a squirrel would be something. And here's the catch. Animals are smarter in winter. Scarcer, too. They know the signs of danger, and they hear you long before you hear them. So, you move slow, controlled, becoming part of the woods. Your breath clouds the air in short bursts. You tighten your cloak. Historians still argue whether winter hunting was more communal or solitary. Some sagas describe group efforts with coordinated drives to herd animals to ward traps. Others hint at lone warriors stalking through snow like silent shadows. Likely, both were true, depending on who you were, how much time you had, and whether or not you could trust Cousin Bjorn not to sneeze during the ambush. You pause at a ridge and crouch, the bow resting lightly in your gloved hand. Tracks, fresh ones, deer, moving low through the forest in search of bark and whatever roots they can dig out. You follow, careful not to snap twigs. Your heart beats faster not from fear, but from purpose. You're not hunting for sport. You're hunting for survival. It's cold work. You may be covered in wool and fur, but your fingertips sting. Your breath is damp against your scarf, and your stomach growls louder than it should. You haven't eaten much. Today's saving rations for the younger kids back home. You finally catch sight of your target. A deer, thin but alive, snuffling near a frozen shrub. You raise your bow slowly. No sudden movements, no noise. Your arm draws back, muscles tensing with quiet focus. Thunk. The arrow flies true. Later, kneeling beside the animal, you whisper a quiet thanks. This isn't just meat, it's meals for days, maybe a week. Bones for broth, hide for repairs, sinew for string. You don't waste anything. Vikings respected their prey. They had to. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some hunters carried small, carved tokens, samimol-shaped charms, or rune-inscribed bones to bring luck in the forest. Not magic, necessarily, but insurance. You've got one tucked in your pouch, a little wooden bear with one ear missing. Found it as a kid. Never went hunting without it since. The hard part's not over. You still have to drag the deer back. Through snow, uphill, on legs that now feel like overcooked turnips. Your arms ache and your nose runs. And at one point, you're pretty sure you hallucinate a snow elf offering to carry it for you. He declines when he sees how heavy it is. But you make it home. Eventually, the door of the longhouse creaks open, and you're flooded with warmth, laughter, the sound of someone playing a low, droning tune on a bone flute. You hoist the deer inside with a grunt, and suddenly you're a hero. Kids rush to look. Your mother nods with that rare expression of actual pride. Even the goat seems vaguely impressed. Butchering is quick and precise. You've done it enough. The meat is sliced thin, salted, and hung in strips near the smoke. The bones are cracked for marrow. The hide will be cleaned tomorrow. Every part has a purpose, and later that night, when you settle by the fire, belly full of roasted venison, something quiet settles over you. Not just satisfaction, not just exhaustion. Something older, deeper. This was what your ancestors did, and their ancestors before them. Walked into the cold, took what they needed, gave thanks, survived. You chew slowly, savoring every bite. The snow taps softly on the roof. Your fingers smell like smoke and meat. And the cold doesn't feel quite as sharp as it did this morning. Just one more day survived. You're back out in the cold. But this time, it's not for hunting, feeding animals, or fetching snow for water. This time, it's for something much simpler and somehow more difficult in winter, gathering firewood. Because no matter how well you eat, or how many layers you wear, or how many goats you stack into a longhouse like it's a weird Viking sleepover, you still need fire. Without it, you're done for. And fires don't burn on compliments and good intentions. They burn on wood. Lots of wood. Your hands are already numb. Your boots are wet. You've done this a dozen times this week, but the fire doesn't care. It just crackles and chews through logs like a dragon with no off switch. Firewood isn't. Just go grab a stick kind of stuff. In a Viking winter, it's planned, chopped, hauled, stacked, and rationed like gold. You trudge to the woodshed, a lopsided structure that moans in the wind, and open the creaking door. The pile inside is shrinking fast. You prepared for it all year. Every spring and summer, you and your kin would scout the nearby woods, cut dead trees, split logs, and pile them high in drying stacks. You'd cover them with bark or straw to keep snow off. But even the best laid logs have a way of disappearing fast when your longhouse needs to stay warm day and night for months on end. So here you are, axe in hand, sled dragging behind you, heading into the forest to find anything dry. Enough to burn and not too green to make your house smell like a swamp. You cross a frozen stream, watching for thin spots. The trees creak above you, their bare branches rattling like bones. The world is quiet, except for the occasional flutter of a bird or the distant knock of a woodpecker. This forest is both your resource and your danger zone. You've been told stories of people who wandered too far, chasing firewood, and never came back. Historians still argue how much of the Viking environment was forested versus cleared, especially in heavily settled areas. Some believe deforestation was already a concern by the 10th century, with certain villages facing fuel shortages. Others argue that smart resource rotation, like using brush, driftwood, and peat, helped avoid crisis. Either way, fuel was never taken for granted. You find a downed tree, mostly dry, and get to work. The axe bites into the wood with satisfying cracks, chips flying. It's rhythmic, almost meditative. You stop occasionally to catch your breath, leaning on the handle, steam rising from your sweat despite the frigid air. You're burning calories and time. Firewood gathering isn't a task, it's a lifestyle. You chop what you can, then lash it onto your sled. The load is heavy, awkward, and probably going to throw your back out one of these days. But it's heat. It's survival. Quirky side fact: the Vikings sometimes used a technique called banking the fire to conserve fuel. You'd bury hot coals under ashes at night, insulating them so they stayed warm until morning. No need to relight from scratch. Just stir the coals, add wood, and boom heat. Some families even used small stone fire pits with covers to preserve warmth overnight. ancient thermal engineering, and if you lived near the coast, lucky you. Driftwood was a real priority, dried, salted by the sea, often worn smooth. It burned fast and hot. Just try not to think too much about where it floated from. Viking superstition warned that some driftwood came from shipwrecks, worse, bad luck logs. You burned those with a whispered prayer. You finally drag the sled back home, muscles aching, fingers stiff. Someone helps you unload. The logs are stacked neatly near the hearth, sorted by size and dryness. Nothing fancy, but it's fuel. And the crackle of new flames, licking the fresh wood, is one of the best sounds in the world. You sit near the fire now, letting it warm your legs. There's soot on your cheek, sap on your gloves, but you're content, because without this fire, you'd freeze in your sleep. Without wood, there's no cooked food, no boiling water, no light, no warmth, no comfort. Just cold, endless, and absolute. There's a quiet ceremony to tending a fire, feeding it bit by bit, watching the flames curl around the logs, knowing that for a few hours you've beaten the cold again. Some nights, someone will sit up with it, keeping it alive, guarding the cold, whispering stories into the flickering shadows. And here's something strange. In Norse mythology, fire had a spiritual side. The hearth was sacred. Some homes had stones with carved runes placed near the fire to bless the flame, ward off spirits, or honor ancestors. Fire wasn't just heat. It was memory, family, connection. The line between survival and soul. You poke the fire with an iron rod, watching sparks shoot upward. They dance for a second, then vanish. You wonder if that's what the gods look like, brief bursts of brilliance against a long, dark sky as the night deepens. The longhouse quiet. The fire still glows, but gently now, like it's tired too. You wrap a wool cloak tighter around your shoulders and smile at the warmth on your face. The forest gave you this heat. Your hands brought it home. And now, for a few more hours, the cold waits outside. Not here, not tonight. You wake to the faint glow of dawn filtering through the frosted window slats. And for a moment, the longhouse feels like a warm cocoon. But you know the cold outside hasn't eased. It's waiting, patient and relentless, ready to swallow any careless soul who dares linger too long in the shadows. So you pull yourself out of bed, careful not to disturb the snoozing family huddled together, their breaths misting in the chilly air. Morning is a busy time. You start with tending the fire, coaxing it back to life with leftover embers and a small handful of kindling. No modern matches, here's just flint and steel. A strike or two, and a spark dancing on dry tinder. It's a simple ritual, but one that feels as essential as breathing. Without that fire, you'd be left shivering and struggling before the day even begins. Your breath fogs up the room as you move to prepare a meal. Mix them into a coarse porridge, thick with whatever fat you could save from the last hunt. There's a salty tang, a hint of bitterness from herbs foraged in better weather, and a warmth that spreads through your body with each bite. Food here isn't a luxury, it's medicine. Outside, the frost glints on the longhouse roof, and you know the chores won't wait. You bundle up again, this time to check on the stored roots and vegetables in the cellar. These are precious parsnips, turnips, carrots, stored in layers of sand or straw to protect them from the freezing air. Carefully pick through the layers, selecting what's still firm and fresh, and avoid any that have begun to spoil. No wasting food in winter. That's Viking law in its own way. You carry the vegetables back inside and start peeling. The smell of earthy root fills the air, mixing with smoke and the faint musk of animals. Cooking is a slow process, usually done over an open hearth or in clay pots that can handle the heat and the soot. You simmer the roots into a stew, adding dried herbs and a pinch of salt. The meal will be simple but nourishing, and while you work, your mind drifts to the strange fact that in some Norse communities, people might have eaten fermented foods during the winter, like sauerkraut or pickled fish. Fermentation was a way to preserve food and add variety to an otherwise monotonous diet. Not exactly everyone's favorite, but it kept scurvy and boredom at bay. Historians still debate how widespread fermentation was among the Vikings. Some archaeological evidence points to it being common in coastal areas, while others suggest it was less frequent inland due to climate and available resources. Either way, Vikings were resourceful with their food, experimenting with preservation long before refrigerators were even a dream. After breakfast, you move outside to inspect the snow-packed roof. Heavy snow can collapse a longhouse roof, so families took care to brush it off when possible. Not an easy task when the air bites at your fingers and the ground shifts beneath your feet. But safety comes first. You remember an old tale from your grandmother about a Viking woman who climbed her roof in a blizzard to clear the snow, saving her family from disaster. It's hard to imagine the courage, or perhaps stubbornness, that took. You're not sure if you're more impressed or terrified. Returning inside, you find your younger sibling trying to light a small fire, using a few dry twigs and a flint. You offer a half smile and a quick lesson strike the flint sharply. Catch the spark on dry moss blow gently. It's the kind of knowledge passed down through generations. A ritual as old as fire itself. As the day stretches on, you feel the rhythm of Viking winter life. Chores, care for animals, maintenance of the home, and moments of quiet reflection by the hearth. It's hard, relentless, and sometimes lonely, but there's also a strange peace in a bond with the earth, the ancestors, and the enduring cycle of seasons. Your hands are rough, your face cold, but your spirit is steady. Winter might be long, but so are you. You're settling in for the evening. But before the fire dims completely, there's one more ritual that demands your attention. Clothing care. Winter's cold is brutal, but it's often the dampness that gnaws at you, the wet mittens, the soaked socks, the clammy undershirts that make chills sneak under your skin like invisible snakes. So, tonight, you take stock of what needs drying and repair. Furs and wool are your best friends, but even they aren't invincible. You lay your damp clothes near the fire, careful not to scorch the fibers, then begin the slow, patient work of mending holes. A tear in a cloak isn't just an inconvenience, it's a potential invitation for frostbite. Your fingers. It's a quiet task, almost meditative. You recall how your mother taught you to use the sinew pulled from animal tendons, stronger than any thread you've ever seen. It's not just practical, it's ancestral. Every stitch feels like connecting to those who came before, those who braved the cold in much the same way. You pause for a moment and think about how the Vikings dyed their wool with natural sources, lichen, berries, and bark-raiding clothes that weren't just warm but also colorful. A splash of red here or a streak of yellow. There wasn't just fashion, it was identity. And yes, it might have helped when the cold turned the world monochrome. Historians still argue about how common colorful clothing really was in winter months. Some suggest that dyes faded quickly and the harsh weather forced people to wear more practical, undyed layers. Others believe that bright colors were a symbol of status and were carefully preserved. Whatever the truth, Vikings clearly valued their appearance even in the bleakest months. Drying your clothes involves more than just heat. Ventilation is key. You hang furs and woven garments on wooden racks above the hearth, letting the smoke and warm air do their magic. That smoky aroma, so distinct, becomes part of your personal scent, in winter comforting, but a little pungent. Like walking through a campfire. Here's a quirky fact. Some Vikings used a kind of natural water repellent made from animal fats and waxes, rubbing it into leather boots and cloaks to keep moisture out. Think of it as an ancient Gore-Tex, minus the fancy brand. This made a huge difference in wet snow and sleet, helping boots last longer and feet stay warmer. As you finish stitching a patch on your woolen sleeve, you glance over at the fire, now just glowing embers. The longhouse feels cozier, safer, protected by walls, smoke, and your careful work. Your thoughts drift to the future spring, when you can shed layers and the sun will actually feel like sun again. But for now, there's pride in making what you have last. In a time when buying new clothes meant bartering or crafting from scratch, fixing and preserving was survival. Clothes weren't just protection from the cold. They were armor against despair, and tomorrow. You'll do it all again. The longhouse is quiet, except for the crackling fire and the occasional low murmur from a family member lost in dreams. You lay awake, your body wrapped in thick furs, but your mind drifts to the sky above, the endless, dark winter sky, blanketing the land in twilight. Without streetlights or neon, the stars are sharper here, brighter like icy diamonds scattered across a velvet cloak. Tonight, you're thinking about the moon and how important it was for the Vikings. They didn't have modern calendars or weather apps to tell them when the cold would ease or when the sun would return to chase away the endless night. Instead, they read the sky, the phases of the moon, the patterns of stars, and the dance of the northern lights. These celestial signals were crucial for planning everything from planting crops to going on sea voyages to knowing when to prepare for winter's worst. You recall stories of Viking navigators using the moon's position to help guide their ships. The northern lights, Aurora Borealis, were not just breathtaking shows. They were sometimes thought to be spirits or gods communicating with the living. Some legends even say these lights were reflections of the Valkyries' armor as they rode through the heavens. Historians still argue how much the Vikings relied on celestial navigation during their expeditions, especially in winter months when daylight was scarce. Some suggest their legendary skill came more from experience and instinct, combined with tools like the sunstone, mysterious crystal set to locate the sun even on cloudy days. Whether myth or fact, it speaks to the Vikings' deep connection with the sky. Back in the longhouse, you feel the cold creeping in despite the fire, a reminder that darkness and frost are relentless, but there's comfort in rituals tied to the night sky. You know, when the moon is full, the nights might be colder but clearer. When it's new, the darkness is absolute, but it's time to rest and conserve energy. The Vikings also marked the passage of time with festivals, moments of warmth and celebration amid the chill. Midwinter festivals, like Yule, were about light and hope, with feasts, fires, and gifts exchanged. They weren't just parties, they were lifelines for morale, reasons to gather, and remember that spring would come again. You let your eyes close, imagining the auroras shimmering overhead, a ghostly ballet of greens and purples swirling above frozen fjords. The cold wind outside howls softly, but inside, you feel connected not just to your family, but to the centuries of ancestors who looked up at the same sky, searched the same stars, and survived the same long winter nights before sleep claims. You whisper a quiet thanks for the fire, the furs, the food, and the stars. Because in the deep, dark cold, hope can be as simple as knowing the moon will rise again. The morning dawns, gray and still, and you're out by the edge of the frozen sea again. This time, it's not for hunting or gathering wood, but for something equally vital, fishing beneath the ice. The water is dark and silent under the thick ice sheet. A hidden world teeming with life you can't see but know is there. Vikings relied heavily on the sea, not just for voyages and raids, but as a steady food source, especially in winter when the land was locked in frost. You find a spot where the ice is thinner, maybe a natural crack or a hole left open by a recent thaw. Using a sharp blade, you chip and hack at the ice, sending shards flying like tiny glass stars. It's back-breaking work, and your breath comes out in frosty clouds. But patience is key. Through the hole, you lower a simple fishing line weighted with a bone hook. Waiting is cold, slow, but also meditative. The sea feels alive beneath you, dark and deep, full of mystery and danger. Vikings were skilled fishermen, using not just bone hooks, but also nets woven from flax or animal sinew. Some fishing techniques are still debated by scholars. Did they use traps under the ice, set long lines? Or was most winter fishing done near the shore with hand lines and patience? Likely, it varied by region and circumstance. Here's a quirky fact. Some archaeological finds suggest Vikings may have even used ice spears, long wooden poles tipped with iron to catch fish under the ice, like prehistoric harpoons. Imagine standing there, balancing on slippery ice, spear in hand, waiting for a flash of silver beneath the surface. Suddenly, a tug. You pull carefully, feeling the weight of your catch. A small cod, shimmering despite the cold. It's not much, but it's something. You drop it into a woven basket lined with moss to keep it fresh. Fishing like this isn't glamorous, but it's vital. Fish were salted, smoked, and dried to last through the winter months, adding important protein to your diet when meat was scarce. You pack up your gear and begin the trek back home, the basket swinging at your side. The frozen landscape is harsh, but beautiful crystals of ice sparkling like confetti, breath clouds trailing behind you. The sea's edge is a place of constant change, where the land meets the coldest parts of the world. Back inside the longhouse, you clean and prepare the fish, laying strips over smoke beams to cure. The smell fills the room are sharp, salty aroma that reminds you of the sea and survival. Despite the hardships, you feel a small spark of triumph. You've wrestled with the ice and come away with life itself. It's another piece of the puzzle in surviving. This frozen world, as the fire crackles and the longhouse fills with smoke and warmth, you realize the sea isn't just a barrier or a highway for Viking ships. Sits a pantry, a provider, a lifeline beneath the ice. And so, beneath the cold sky, you feast quietly on the gifts of both forest and sea, remembering that life always finds a way. The long night lingers, but there's a different kind of cold, now a chill that seeps not just through your bones, but through your mind. Winter is harsh, yes, but the isolation can be even harsher. You're surrounded by family, but the days stretch long and dark, and the mind starts to wander, sometimes to places you'd rather not visit. So tonight, you gather with your kin around. The fire for storytelling, the ancient antidote to loneliness and despair. You settle in as your oldest relative clears their throat. The flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The stories come alive, tales of gods and giants, heroic deeds and tragic losses, of cunning and survival. You hear of Thor's hammer smashing frost giants, of Odin's endless quest for wisdom, of Loki's mischief and magic. These myths aren't just entertainment. They're lessons wrapped in wonder, ways to make sense of the cold world outside and the struggles within. They remind you that even the mightiest gods had to endure hardship. You find comfort knowing that your own battles, though smaller, are part of a grander story, a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings used skalds, poets, and storytellers, whose role was to keep history alive through verse and song. They might even improvise, adding their own twists to keep listeners engaged during long, dark winters. Imagine a Viking rap battle, but with epic tales and less bling. Historians still debate how much of Norse mythology was widely believed versus used as cultural storytelling. Some suggest these tales were fluid, adapting with time and audience, while others think they were sacred and strictly preserved. Either way, the power of story was undeniable. As you listen, you feel warmth grown not just from the fire, but from connection. These stories tether you to your heritage, to your people, to something bigger than the cold or the silence. When the tales pause, someone passes around a simple drink, maybe a cup of warm mead or herbal tea. The taste is sweet and bitter all at once, a small comfort against the biting chill. You glance outside at the endless night, but inside there's light, laughter, and the steady rhythm of voices. Winter might be long, but the stories make it shorter, and in those stories, you find hope. You settle down for the last time this evening, wrapped once again in your furs. The fires glow soft and warm nearby. The cold outside presses in relentlessly, but inside your longhouse there's a fragile bubble of safety and comfort. It's the end of another day in the long Viking winter, and you reflect on everything that has kept you alive so far. From your layered clothing of wool and fur, painstakingly patched and maintained, to the firewood gathered through pain and persistence. From the food preserved by ancient methods to the stories that weave warmth into the darkest hours, each is part of a delicate balance. You realize that surviving the cold wasn't just about toughness. It was about community, knowledge, and respect for the land and seasons. The Vikings knew the cold would outlast any single person together. They endured. Here's a quirky note to end on. Some Vikings believed in Lopandi, Huga, a running spirit or energy that helped them push through hard times. Whether that was just a poetic idea or a real source of inner strength, it certainly sums up the spirit of resilience. Historians still argue about how much daily life stories and folklore influenced Viking survival strategies. Did belief shape behavior, or did behavior inspire belief? Probably like fire and smoke intertwined. As you close your eyes, the crackle of the fire fades into a gentle whisper. You imagine the snow outside settling silently, the stars watching over you, the ancient rhythms of winter beating softly in your chest. In this moment, you feel a quiet pride. You have survived the cold because you adapted, because you learned, because you never gave up. And tomorrow, the cycle begins anew. You drift into sleep, carried by the warmth of fire, family, and the knowledge that even in the coldest times, life finds a way. Now, as you let your breathing slow and your body sink deeper into rest, imagine the frost outside melting gently in the soft morning light. The cold that felt so sharp and unforgiving now seems distant, softened by time and warmth. Remember the crackling fire, the thick furs, the steady rhythm of life lived fully despite hardship. Each breath you take is a whisper of resilience, a promise of spring beyond winter's grasp. Let your mind drift with the northern lights, shimmering softly across the dark sky, a silent lullaby from ages past. You are part of that long story, connected to the endless dance of seasons, stars, and survival. Feel your body relax, the tension melting away like snow on warm earth. Here, in this safe space, you are warm, protected, and gently held by history itself. Sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest cold, there is light and life waiting to greet you. Good night. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.